And welcome our last speaker of this evening. Rosemary Liñán Landa is a Rio Grande Valley native, born to a father who is deaf and a mother who is a sign language interpreter herself. She pursued a career in the field and earned a Master's of Science in Deaf Studies. She has worked as a special needs daycare specialist and teaching classes to deaf teens in many different areas. She is an American Sign Language interpreter, and she works as the interpreter coordinator and main sign interpreter here in UTV, where she also teaches as an adjunct professor foundation courses in American Sign Language. Let's welcome our last speaker of the day, Professor Rosemary Liñán Landa. Welcome.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Okay. My presentation is going to be a little bit different because it's in a field that is a little bit out there. I'm the oddball of the presenters here. And I'm going to be talking about introduction to the interpreting profession as it applies to American Sign Language interpreting. Okay, and so I'm going to talk about the stepping stones to becoming a qualified sign language interpreter. My presentation is more geared towards students, what you can do to become a sign language interpreter, and then also how, in the end, how you can specialize within that field. Okay? But before I talk about the interpreting profession, I have to talk about the community that we work with. Okay, a lot of people, when they hear that you want to be a sign language interpreter, they think about, oh, the interpreter is the one that is there to help them, is there to hold their hand, more kind of thing. But this is the community that I work for. This is a picture of two former graduates of the University of Texas here, Brownsville. One of them graduating with an associate's, another with a bachelor's degree in business. They're both husband and wife, and they're saying I love you to each other. You guys can say it. Oh, I know, it's a beautiful picture. I love this picture, and I use it. They've graduated since many years, but I still use this picture in almost every presentation. But this is who we work for. We work for a community that is a linguistic and cultural minority. We don't think of them in terms of being disabled, but in terms of being a linguistic and cultural minority. And that is something that's relatively new. You can view a deaf person in two ways. You can view them in the cultural way, or you can also view them in the pathological way. Pathological, medical, those terms are interchangeable, but when you view someone as a cultural minority, then you think of them as far as their intelligence, their ability, you think of them as no difference. You think positive, for example, they can do this, can do that, that they have a culture and their way of communicating is simply different. Not inferior, the language is not inferior. You don't think immediately of the things they cannot do, but you think positively of these individuals. And American Sign Language is itself being declared a modern language. That is something that's relatively new. But again, we work for a linguistic and cultural minority. Okay, and it's not until let me go back here. I went ahead of myself a little bit. Of course, you're going to have variability because you're going to have some individuals who are deaf / maybe another disability, deaf / schizophrenic, deaf / they have cerebral palsy. You will have some variability, but the variability is no different than if you're working with hearing consumers. As far as the hearing population, you have variability within individuals, some that are more educated than others, some that are not. You have to think about those variables when you're working in the interpreting field. You're going to run across a lot of variability, but for the most part, linguistic cultural minority, okay? So the interpreting profession, the American Sign Language interpreting profession, is relatively new. This is a beautiful YouTube video. If you have a chance to look at it, if you go to YouTube and you type in "A Beautiful Day" by CAAG, which is an organization, it kind of chronicles the American Sign Language interpreter profession through the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And you can kind of tell which generation belongs to which, right? In the 60s, we have, Leave It to Beaver type style of clothing, black and white. And we have the mother going with the deaf individual and interpreting for the deaf individual. But it's really funny because when you watch the video, you see how, for example, the son says, "Yes, I need to get some allergy medication," and the mother interprets, "Yes, he needs allergy medication. Plus, he's been really grouchy lately, la 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 la," and her mouth is still moving, and the deaf guy is, "What's going on?" Right? No control over the situation. Then we come to where finally in the 70s we become a profession, and you can see, check out that guy's mustache, right? Enviable. And then we get to the 80s where we're just getting better at this. And then we come to over here nowadays where we have they have the background music of "It's a Beautiful Day," where actually the deaf person is the doctor himself, and then we have a Spanish-speaking individual who is the patient, and then we have a trilingual interpreter, someone who knows Spanish, English, and American Sign Language. So our profession has come a long way. Okay, so now we're done with our mindset. We have our mindset that the deaf individuals are a linguistic and cultural minority. We've got that down. Now let's talk about how we can become American Sign Language interpreters, okay? Okay, of course, the first step is to acquire fluency. Fluency meaning you're able to readily and effortlessly express yourself. You have to attend an interpreter training program. I am a native, but I had to attend an interpreter training program. In order to get the ethics, in order to get the professional formal language, I needed to attend a program. And you can also attend a program. And this is the easiest way you can find one near you or in the area that you care to study. If you go to the Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf website, they have this this application where you can just type in, for example, the state that you're looking for an interpreter training program, and all the interpreter training programs in that state will appear. Okay, so this is the easiest way to find an interpreter training program in your area, but you must get educated. A lot of people assume that after taking ASL 1 and ASL 2, you automatically can become an interpreter, which I don't know where they get that from. I took Spanish 1, Spanish 2. My professor, Ana Pena, you were wonderful, but I'm still not a trilingual interpreter. I would need to really get in there. I would need full immersion to become trilingual, but I did want to have some exposure, so it still helped me anyways. After you attend an interpreter training program, just the degree alone is not going to enable you to become a qualified interpreter. Then you need to take your certification exam. Okay, which is why it's important to check out those interpreter training programs, because some will have a high percentage of graduates receiving their certification upon graduation, and then some that don't. So you really need to investigate which interpreter training program you want to attend. Now, for certification, there's a national certification, and then there's also one for the state. I'm going to talk about the one for Texas because that I feel is more relevant to us. Okay, I can also, if you have questions about the national certification test, I can also answer questions about that. Okay, so for Texas, we have two parts of the exam that you'll need to pass before you can become a sign language interpreter. The first one tests your English proficiency, because you have to be proficient in English in order to be a sign language interpreter. English, you're interpreting between English and ASL. And so it's called the test of English proficiency, and those are the different parts of the exam. Reading comprehension, synonyms, grammar, and usage. This is no GRE exam. It's meant to just measure if you are fluent in the English language, okay? It's not that difficult. I believe it's at the 12th grade reading level. Though some who are non-native English speakers may have a little bit more difficulty. It is timed, so that might add to the difficulty. Once you've taken and you've passed your English proficiency exam, then now you need to take your performance exam. And now there's 3 levels of, you will actually become certified in one of 3 levels. You have to take the basic first, then you can become advanced, and then you can become the master, right? Right here I give you an example of the basic performance exam format. There's an expressive part. There's parts where you're listening to information and you're interpreting it simultaneously with sign language. Then there's parts where you are viewing somebody who is deaf signing, and then you will have to voice simultaneously. There's also a sight translation where you take a document that is in English and you translate that into American Sign Language. And you can see the the words per minute there, 110 words per minute, and this is for the basic. What the difference between the basic and the advanced and the master is 2 things. It gets faster, and then the other thing is it gets more complex. If you want to become a basic certified interpreter, then you probably will end up in the educational setting, K through 12, also vocational. If you want to become advanced, then you get to do more things, go into medical here and there. Master, then you get more into legal and complicated medical. Okay, each level of certification will tell you where you can and cannot work. Well, it should. We have a lot of difficulty where we have individuals working that are not certified, which is unfortunate. But there are guidelines that say, for example, a basic certified interpreter should work in A, B, or C settings, advanced A, B, or C, and etc. This is a field that you can really specialize in. There are a lot of areas that you can get into. For example, medical interpreting, if you are more prone towards that. There's also mental health interpreting, video relay interpreting, which is what I do full time. I interpret phone conversations between deaf and hearing participants. So you never know who you're gonna get. Somebody pops up. We can see, myself and the deaf individual can see each other on a television screen. So they pop up, they tell me to call certain person, this doctor's office, that police officer. I go ahead and I make the phone call, or it could just be the pizza delivery guy is outside and open the door. You know, conversations from, we have people from various backgrounds that use ASL calling in, or also we have hearing participants calling us, and we make phone calls to deaf individuals. Do you want to buy a house? Do you want to do this or that kind of thing? Hey, I saw your ad on Craigslist. We interpret different conversations. That's what I do full time. Also interpreting music. You see sometimes in concert, you'll see an interpreter there. I don't sing very well, only by myself in the shower. I'm wonderful, but I'm not usually the musical interpreter, but there are some that have a knack for that. Also working with the deaf and blind. I don't know if you've ever seen someone who is deaf and blind, where you sign into their hand and they can read you in that way. There's a specialization for that. Also interpreting for films and performances. Educational interpreter, as I mentioned. Trilingual interpreting, that is something new that is up and coming. We have many trilingual interpreters, especially in this region. Some that work interpreting those phone calls, for example, in the video relay system. We have trilingual interpreters, Spanish, English, and ASL. Platform interpreters, like the famous Lydia Callas, interpreting there for the mayor of New York. And then we have our court and legal interpreters. Not only can you specialize within the field of American Sign Language interpreting, but you can also decide you want to be, for example, a psychologist, an educator. And then you have sign language and you are able to work with that special population. You can specialize in that way, or specialize within the interpreting field in the various settings that you'll interpret. So it's a very, very interesting field. You can do a lot of things with it. In the end, in my conclusion, I will say that really what it requires to become an American Sign Language interpreter is the humility and also the ability to work with others. You're going to be working with lots of different personalities, lots of different characters, and you really have to have the humility not to take over or dominate the conversation, but to be the facilitator of communication. And there really is a scarcity. You'll always be in demand. Your job will always be in demand, and also it's very rewarding. rewarding, not because I'm there to help the deaf person, but because I'm helping facilitate the communication between both parties, between the one that requires the ASL interpretation, the one that requires the English, facilitating the communication between both, because if not for you, then there would be no communication, there would be a barrier. So it is a very rewarding profession. So that's all I have for today. If any of you have any questions, I'll be happy to take that. Thank you. Okay.
This is a very interesting topic.
Yes.
I was just to interject with one short comment. We were discussing a few minutes before we started how similar these activities are, sign language interpreting and
Yes.
verbal interpreting, and how far apart the academic and professional traditions are. So it was a great idea here for Superman having the representative of the American Sign Language interpreting that side of things.
Well, I appreciate you inviting me, because really not a lot of people know too much about this profession. So it's every opportunity I have to speak regarding the profession, I am willing to share.
Thank you so much. And we have a question here.
One question, please. Thank you. If you sign in English, let's say, okay, I'm talking to her in English, and she's understanding me in English, right? Now, there's a different sign for Spanish?
Every country has its own sign language, yes. Is that your question?
Yes, that's my,
Yes.
okay.
But when I'm interpreting between ASL and English, I'm interpreting not English to a gestural English, but I'm interpreting from English to a separate and distinct language, American Sign Language.
Okay.
Yes.
So, but then in Spanish it's totally different.
But in Spanish, you would have LSM lengua de, help me.
So you wouldn't use the sign.
Mexican Sign Language. Different in different regions, yes.
Okay, I thought in English someone in Spanish could understand me. No, she couldn't?
If I was interpreting if I was signing American Sign Language, and this person came from, for example, Mexico, then they would not.
They would not
There would
understand
be
your
a
sign?
communication barrier.
Okay,
there.
that's what I wanted
Yes.
to know. Thank
Mhm.
you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Then the question is, can you be bilingual also in sign? In other words, to know how to do sign language in two different languages.
Yes, you can. You can. And really the closest example of this is 70% of American Sign Language is similar to French Sign Language. So if I wanted to become bilingual in two separate sign languages, I would probably go with French, because we're a little bit more similar. But yes, you can be bilingual with two separate sign languages, yes.
In our program, we had a beautiful video posted by one of our students. He himself is an American Sign Language interpreter. He's speaking from Brownsville now, living somewhere else. He went to Nicaragua, and we could see how they had several interpreters relating from Spanish to Spanish Sign Language, and then from Spanish Sign Language to American Sign Language, and then somebody else to English. So it is not just the world of the language of the deaf, it's a world of languages. And need to use everything.
And if you YouTube "We Are Deaf" by Deaf Nation, it will show you different sign language from all over the country. It's a really beautiful video. You should watch. Mhm.
One last question. I'm pretty loud now. We need it for the webcast. Oh, okay.
How long did it take to become desensitized as far as the situation that you're put in as an interpreter?
I don't know that you become desensitized. There are certain situations where you can and cannot work. If you feel like it impacts you as an individual, and you feel like you're too, for example, I interpreted for Child Protective Services for a few years. I could no longer do that because I kept on wanting to take all the children home. So that is something that I would not put myself into, because I know how sensitive I am, for example, to those situations. Children being taken away from their deaf parents, or deaf children who are being abused by by their own parents, things like that of that nature, I would not be able to interpret that. There are other individuals who have that ability to desensitize themselves from the situation. My personal, because I had a father who is deaf, and also I'm very much into the community, I wanted to save all of them and take them home. So I couldn't do that. So each individual interpreter would have their own places where they, and that's a part of the ethics, to accept the assignments with discretion, that you feel like you have the ability to work at. So I hope I answered that question.
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.